A newly retired lawyer from Oregon told his wife he needed a solo hike to process his big life change and set off for Mount Hood. But he never came home, leaving his devoted wife wondering what went wrong. The case went cold, with investigators believing he'd either taken his own life or suffered a tragic accident. 4 years later, hikers exploring the wilderness downstream stumble upon something shocking. Trapped in a beaver dam, evidence that would shatter the official theory and prove his wife's instincts had been right all along. Clara Weston's hands trembled as she cracked eggs into the skillet, the morning sun filtering through her kitchen window and casting the faint outline of Mount Hood against the pale Oregon sky. 4 years had passed since David, her husband of 35 years, had pressed a quick kiss to her forehead, promised to return by dinner, and vanished into the wilderness he cherished. The eggs sizzled in the pan, but Clara's thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the relentless ache of not knowing what had happened to him. The shrill ring of the phone cut through the quiet, startling her so badly that the spatula slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the counter. She glanced at the caller ID, Mount Hood National Forest Service. Her heart stuttered. They hadn't called in over 2 years. "Mrs. Clara Weston," came the voice, professional yet softened with care. "This is Ranger Tom Bradley from Mount Hood National Forest. We need you to come to the station. Some hikers found a backpack yesterday, caught in a beaver dam by the Sandy River. We traced it through the GPS tracker's serial number. It belongs to your husband, David." The words hit her like a punch, stealing her breath. A backpack, after all this time. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll be there. Is there anything else? Can you come soon, ma'am? We have questions, and the sheriff's department is already here." Clara's mind churned as she drove the winding road to the ranger station, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. Each curve of the highway brought back memories of drives with David, his face lighting up as he talked about the trails, his promises to always be careful. He'd hiked these paths for 25 years, his methodical nature making him a master of preparation, checking maps, packing supplies, filing detailed plans. The ranger station's parking lot was crowded with 2 sheriff's cruisers parked alongside the usual Forest Service trucks, and Clara's stomach twisted as she stepped out of her car, the crisp scent of pine and damp earth flooding her senses. It was the same smell that had clung to David's jacket after every hike, a scent that now triggered a flood of memories. Ranger Tom Bradley, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s with kind eyes, greeted her at the door. "Mrs. Weston, thank you for coming. This is Sheriff Daniel Holt from Clackamas County." Sheriff Holt, a lean man with a weathered face and graying hair clipped short, extended a firm handshake. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, Mrs. Weston. Please, have a seat." They led her to a small conference room where David's backpack sat on a wooden table, its black and green canvas mud-stained and frayed, one strap partially torn. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She recognized it instantly, the pack she'd given him for his 55th birthday, complete with the silver carabiner he always clipped to the side, engraved with his initials, DAW. The hikers found it lodged in a beaver dam about 10 miles downstream from Zigzag Falls. Ranger Bradley explained, his voice steady but gentle. "It was half buried in branches and mud, nearly missed. We traced it through the GPS device's serial number, which was still legible." Sheriff Holt opened a manila folder, pulling out a topographic map. "Mrs. Weston, we recovered a memory card from the GPS device inside the pack. The antenna was damaged, which explains why we couldn't ping it during our searches 4 years ago. But the card retained data from before it broke." Clara leaned forward, her heart pounding, a mix of hope and dread tightening her chest. "What did it show?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The data indicates your husband went deliberately off trail that day," Holt said, his tone measured. "The last signal came from a remote area, far from any marked path right here." He pointed to the map, his finger landing on a rugged section of wilderness near the Sandy River's headwaters. a place far from David's usual routes. We searched those exact coordinates again yesterday and this morning. Found nothing. Clara shook her head, her voice rising with disbelief. David never went off trail. He was meticulous about safety. He filed his hiking plans, stayed on marked paths. In 25 years, he never once deviated from his registered route. Sheriff Holt's expression remained impassive, though his eyes softened slightly. The GPS data is clear, Mrs. Weston. He was miles from where he said he'd be hiking. Given the location and the 4 years that have passed, we're looking at two possibilities: suicide or an accident. The word suicide hit Clara like a slap. David had just retired, she said, her voice cracking. We had plans, a trip to Hawaii, visiting our daughter, Lily, in Seattle. He was excited about having more time together. He wouldn't. Her words faltered, tears stinging her eyes. I know this is difficult, Holt said, his voice gentling, but after 4 years, with wildlife and natural decomposition, there'd be very little trace remaining. We won't be reopening the case. The search of those coordinates yielded nothing, and frankly, there's nothing more we can do. Clara felt the room constrict around her, the air heavy. You're giving up? Just like that? We're not giving up, Mrs. Weston, Holt said. We're being realistic. Your husband went off trail to a dangerous area, whether intentionally or by accident. The outcome is the same. The case will remain closed. Through her tears, Clara examined the backpack's contents with Ranger Bradley, who stayed while Holt stepped out to take a call. David's law license sat in a plastic holder, warped but readable. David Allen Weston, attorney at law. The photo showed his warm blue eyes behind rimless glasses, that steady smile she missed so desperately. His hiking permit, dated September 10th, 4 years ago, was faded but legible. His phone, its screen cracked and filled with murky water, was completely destroyed. A small leather notebook, its pages stuck together, held fragments of case notes in David's precise handwriting, client names, dates, legal terms. The unusual thing, Bradley said quietly, glancing toward the door to ensure they were alone, is where we found this. The Beaver Dam is miles downstream from any marked trail. For the pack to end up there, your husband would have had to be somewhere completely off his registered route. The river's flow pattern suggested traveled a significant distance. Clara stared at the ruined items, her mind refusing to accept the implications. David was obsessive about safety, checking weather reports twice, carrying backup batteries, packing emergency supplies. It's what made him such a brilliant lawyer, always prepared, always thorough. This didn't add up. This isn't right, she said, her voice trembling. He wouldn't leave me like this. Not after 35 years. Not when he was so excited for retirement. Bradley's expression was sympathetic, but he offered no answers. Sometimes even experienced hikers make mistakes, Mrs. Weston. Or sometimes people don't want to be found. Clara knew better. David had been counting down to retirement, circling days on the calendar in his study with a blue pen, his excitement almost boyish. He'd talked endlessly about their plans, sailing lessons, a garden they'd plant together, teaching Lily's son to camp. She left the station clutching a plastic bag with photocopies of the permit and a receipt for the backpack, which they kept as evidence of what she couldn't say. Nothing about this felt like closure. She sat in her car outside the station, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles ached. The morning had shifted from routine breakfast to an earth-shattering discovery, and she needed to talk to someone who knew David, who understood the kind of man he was. His former colleagues at Cascade Legal Partners deserved to know about the backpack. The drive to the firm took her through downtown Hood River, past the coffee shop where David used to grab his daily espresso, and the park where they'd celebrated his retirement with a picnic, colleagues toasting his decades of service. The memories were everywhere, inescapable. The law firm's office had changed since David's time. The familiar wooden doors had been replaced with sleek glass, the sign updated with modern lettering. The waiting room was stark, white walls, chrome furniture, a far cry from the warm space David had helped design. The young receptionist barely looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped. "I'm Clara Weston," Clara said, steadying her voice. "My husband, David Weston, was a partner here. I need to speak with someone about a development." The receptionist's brow furrowed. "I don't recognize that name. I've only been here a year. Let me get the office manager." A moment later, a woman in her 30s approached, her heels clicking on the polished floor. "Mrs. Weston? I'm Lisa Carter, office manager. I didn't know your husband. The firm was restructured 2 years ago, and most of the staff changed. But Emily Stone is still here. She worked with David." Clara felt a wave of relief. Emily had been David's paralegal, sharp and loyal, someone he'd trusted implicitly. "She's with a client right now," Lisa continued, "but she'll be free in about 15 minutes. You can wait in the break room if you'd like. It's more private than out here." The break room was one thing that hadn't changed. Same worn round table where David used to eat lunch, always making time to chat with staff, lifting their spirits. Clara sat, tracing the table's familiar scratches, her mind replaying the morning's revelations. 18 minutes later, Emily rushed in, her face creasing with concern when she saw Clara. "Clara, oh my gosh, it's been too long," she said, embracing her warmly before pulling back to study her face. "You look upset. Is everything okay?" Clara's words tumbled out the backpack, the GPS data, the police's conclusions about suicide or an accident. Emily listened intently, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "They found it in a beaver dam? After all this time?" Emily sank into the chair across from Clara, shaking her head. "I can't believe it. We still miss him here, those of us who are left anyway. The police think he went off trail deliberately, suggesting suicide or that he got lost. But you knew David. He'd never." Her voice trailed off, her eyes searching Clara's. Clara nodded, her throat tight. "David was so careful about hiking safety. He planned everything. The GPS showing him miles off trail, it doesn't make sense." Emily's expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing her face. She glanced toward the door, then back to Clara. "You know, now that you mention it, David did seem different that final week." Clara's pulse quickened. "Different how?" Emily hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Anxious, distracted. He was checking his phone constantly, which wasn't like him at all. During client meetings, he was still sharp, focused. David never let his work slip, but between appointments, he seemed worried." Clara's hands tightened around her purse. "Did he say anything?" Emily's eyes darted to the door again, and she stood to close it softly before returning to her seat. "I asked him on that Wednesday, during lunch. I remember because he was sitting right here, his sandwich untouched, which was so unlike him. I asked if he was okay, if retirement was getting to him. He gave me this tight smile and said he had a lot to wrap up before leaving the firm. It sounded reasonable, but it was how he said it. His hands were shaking slightly when he picked up his coffee mug. In 12 years of working with him, through high-stakes cases, tough clients, I'd never seen David's hands shake." The break room felt smaller, the fluorescent lights too bright. Was there anything else unusual that week? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily's expression grew guarded, her fingers twisting together. "This is probably nothing, and I've never told anyone, but Mr. Thompson's behavior was odd that week." Clara pictured Richard Thompson, David's senior partner, tall, charismatic, with a polished smile. They had dinner with Richard and his wife, Susan, several times over the years, sharing stories of cases and vacations. "Odd how?" she asked. Emily's voice dropped even lower. "When a lawyer retires, the whole team usually pitches in to transfer files, update records, reassign clients. It's a huge task. But Thompson insisted on handling David's files himself. Said he wanted to ensure a smooth transition. At first, I thought he was just being thorough, but he was at the office until midnight several nights that week. I know because I forgot my badge one evening and came back around 10 o'clock. His office light was still on, and I saw boxes of files stacked inside. The strange thing? He took them home instead of storing them in our records room. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. David had never mentioned anything unusual about Richard. He took client files home? She asked. Emily nodded, her lips tight. I thought it was strange, but Thompson was the boss. He threw David that big retirement party, all smiles and speeches, but after hours, it was like he was hiding something. I don't know, Clara. Grief makes us look for answers where there might not be any. Clara's mind raced. Richard taking files home, David's shaking hands, the GPS data showing him miles off trail. It all felt connected, though she couldn't see how. Did the files ever come back? She asked. Emily shook her head. I don't know. By the time I thought to ask, the firm had been sold. Thompson made a fortune from that sale, from what I heard. He opened a bigger practice in Portland, multi-specialty, high-end tech. He's doing well, speaking at legal conferences about innovative case management. Her tone carried a hint of disapproval. Very different from the Thompson who used to say client trust came first. The break room door opened, and Lisa Carter peered in. Emily, your 2 o'clock is here. Emily squeezed Clara's hands. I'm so sorry about the backpack, Clara. If you need anything at all, call me. She paused at the door, her voice soft. I know the police have their theories, but I knew David. Whatever happened on Mountain, it wasn't because he wanted to leave you. He talked about your retirement plans constantly, the Hawaii trip, teaching your grandson to fish. He was counting down the days. After Emily left, Clara sat alone for a few minutes, processing what she'd learned. David anxious, distracted. Thompson working late, taking files home. The firm's sale and sudden expansion. None of it proved anything, but combined with the GPS data, it felt like a thread she needed to pull. She thought of the dinners with Richard and Susan, the laughter, the toast to shared successes. Richard had given a heartfelt speech at David's memorial, promising to support Clara. But now, Emily's words echoed. Odd behavior, taking files home. What had happened in David's final week? What had made his steady hands shake? Clara's hands were dusty, her back aching from bending over boxes in the storage unit, the air thick with the smell of mothballs and old paper. Afternoon sunlight slanted through a small window, illuminating dancing dust motes. After Emily's revelations, Clara needed to look through David's things with fresh eyes. She'd kept everything from his home office, every file, every notebook, every receipt, boxed up 4 years ago when grief had been too raw to face them. Now the discovery of the backpack had brought a new urgency. The first 3 boxes yielded nothing unusual: legal journals, thank you letters from clients, certificates from continuing education courses. Clara smiled through tears at a handwritten note from a client, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. Mr. Weston, you saved my family. In the 4th box, wedged between 2 thick binders, she found it. David's leather day planner from his final months. Her breath caught. He'd always preferred pen and paper to digital calendars, a habit from his early days as a lawyer. She flipped to September, her fingers trembling as she found the week he disappeared. Monday, September 7th. Staff meeting 7 a.m. Peterson case 9 a.m. Lunch with Clara at Rivercaf 1 p.m. Tuesday. September 8th. Court 8 a.m. Client consults until 5. Retirement party 6 p.m. Wednesday, September 9th. Nelson and Associates 2 p.m. Evening review files. Thursday, September 10th. Meeting with Thompson, trail parking lot, 7 a.m. Clara stared at the entry, her mind reeling. September 10th, the day David disappeared. He'd told her he was hiking alone. Needed time to clear his head about retirement, to process the shift from a life of law to leisure. She remembered his words over breakfast. Just need a day with the mountain, Clara. You know it centers me. But here, in his careful handwriting, was evidence of a planned meeting with Richard Thompson at the trail parking lot at 7 a.m., exactly when he'd left the house. Why had he lied to her? She flipped back to Wednesday's entry, Nelson and Associates. The name felt vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. Digging deeper into the box, she found a manila folder labeled September receipts in David's precise hand. Inside, paper clipped together, were 3 receipts from Nelson and Associates, the letterhead clarifying her hazy memory. Employment law specialists, protecting workers' rights since 1990. Employment law? David had never mentioned any work issues requiring legal consultation. The receipts showed consultations on September 3rd and 6th, with a 3rd appointment scheduled for September 11th, the day after he disappeared. Clara pulled out her phone, grateful the storage unit had decent cell service. The law office answered on the 2nd ring. Nelson and Associates, how may I direct your call? This is Clara Weston, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. My husband, David Weston, was a client 4 years ago. I'm calling about some receipts I found. One moment, please. The hold music was blandly soothing. Then a professional female voice came on. Mrs. Weston, I'm Miranda Tate, records manager. I see here that Mr. David Weston had consultations with Mr. Nelson in September, 4 years ago. How can I help you? Clara swallowed. I'm trying to understand why my husband needed an employment attorney. He never mentioned any issues at work. There was a pause. I'm limited in what I can share due to attorney-client privilege, even posthumously. However, I can tell you that Mr. Weston's initial inquiry was about whistleblower protections. Clara's mouth went dry. Whistleblower protections? Yes, Miranda said. He asked about protection from retaliation and how to document evidence of workplace issues. He was scheduled for a follow-up on September 11th, but never showed. Mr. Nelson tried calling several times. I remember when we heard about his disappearance, he was quite concerned. He said Mr. Weston sounded very worried during their last conversation, kept asking about whether his family would be protected if he came forward with information. Protected from what? Clara pressed. I'm sorry, I can't share more details, Miranda said, her voice softening. But your husband was very careful in his approach. Whatever he was dealing with, he wanted to handle it properly through legal channels. Clara thanked her and hung up, her mind spinning. Whistleblower protections, evidence documentation, protection from retaliation, and a meeting with Thompson the morning he disappeared, a meeting he'd hidden from her. She loaded the most important boxes into her car, including the day planner and receipts, and drove home, the world feeling surreal. Her quiet neighborhood looked the same as it had that morning, yet everything had changed. David hadn't just gone hiking. He'd gone to meet Richard Thompson about something serious enough to require legal counsel. As she turned onto her street, Clara noticed a black SUV in her driveway. Its customized license plate, unmistakable. LAW4GE, Richard Thompson's car. Her pulse quickened as she pulled up behind it, seeing Richard standing by her front door, chatting with her neighbor, Mrs. Lee. Mrs. Lee waved enthusiastically. Clara, I was just telling Mr. Thompson you were out. He's been waiting for you. Richard turned, his familiar smile in place, but Clara noticed a tightness around his eyes, a tension in his posture. He wore an expensive suit, as always, but his tie was slightly askew, unusual for the meticulous man she'd known for 20 years. Clara, he said warmly, approaching her car. I heard about the backpack. The sheriff's office called me this morning, routine questions since I was David's partner. I wanted to check on you, see how you're handling this. Clara got out of her car slowly, acutely aware of the boxes visible in her back seat. That's kind of you, Richard. It's been a rough morning, Mrs. Lee, ever eager for gossip, chimed in. "I told Mr. Thompson you'd gone to your storage unit. Spring cleaning in September," I said. She laughed, oblivious to the shift in Richard's expression at the mention of the storage unit. His smile faltered for a moment, like a light flickering. "Storage unit?" he asked, his tone casual but carrying an edge Clara hadn't noticed before. "Sorting through old things," Clara replied carefully. "The backpack made me want to reconnect with David's memory." Richard nodded, but his gaze kept drifting to her car. "Of course. Grief works in strange ways. Find anything interesting?" Sometimes old things bring unexpected comfort or surprises. The question felt heavy, loaded with subtext Clara couldn't quite grasp. Mrs. Lee prattled on about her own late husband's belongings, but Richard wasn't listening, his attention fixed on Clara with an intensity that made her uneasy. "Just memories," Clara said, forcing a smile. "If you'll excuse me, Richard, it's been a long day." "Of course," he said, stepping aside, but not before adding, "If you need anything, Clara, please call. David was important to me. I'd hate for his legacy to be tarnished by misunderstandings." The word misunderstandings hung between them, sharp and deliberate. Clara nodded, her legs unsteady as she walked to her front door, feeling Richard's eyes on her back, cataloging the boxes in her car. Clara stood inside her home, leaning against the locked front door, her heart pounding as she peered through the window. Richard Thompson lingered in her driveway, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing sharply. The polished senior partner who'd shared dinners with her and David, who'd toasted their anniversaries with fine wine, now looked like a stranger, his shoulders tense, his face etched with something that wasn't grief. Clara's mind spun with the morning's discoveries, the backpack, the GPS data placing David miles off his planned trail, Emily's revelations about Richard's odd behavior, and now the day planner entry, a secret meeting with Richard at the trail parking lot the morning David vanished. Why had David hidden it from her? And why was Richard so interested in what she'd found in storage? The word he'd used, misunderstandings, echoed in her mind, sharp and loaded. She clutched the day planner, its leather worn but solid, a tangible link to David's final days. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to wait for Richard to decide her next move. The doorbell rang, startling her so badly she nearly dropped the planner. Through the peephole, she saw Richard still on her doorstep, his expression rearranged into one of practiced concern. She considered ignoring it, but something told her that would only make him more persistent. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door partway. "Clara, I'm sorry to bother you again," Richard said, his voice smooth and solicitous. "I realized I must have seemed abrupt earlier. This news about David's backpack has shaken me too. I was wondering, would you like to get coffee? Sometimes it helps to talk with someone who knew him well, who understood what a remarkable man he was." Every instinct screamed caution, but Clara saw an opportunity. If Richard was involved in whatever had troubled David, perhaps she could learn something. She forced a small smile. "I suppose a cup of coffee would be nice." Richard's eyes brightened, but there was something calculated in his gaze. "Wonderful. How about River Brew on Main? David always loved their espresso." Clara nodded, remembering how David used to stop there every morning for his coffee, black, no sugar. "That's fine. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. Richard's smile widened. "I'll drive us, no sense taking two cars." "No," Clara said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll drive myself. I have errands to run afterward." A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed Richard's face, but he nodded. "Of course, I'll see you there." Clara closed the door and immediately pulled out her phone, texting her sister Ellen. "Meeting Richard Thompson at River Brew on Main. If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, call the police. Not joking." Ellen's reply was instant. "What's going on? Are you okay?" Clara typed back quickly. "I'll explain later. Just keep an eye on the time." Her hands shook as she gathered her purse and the day planner, slipping it into a zippered pocket. She wasn't sure why, but she felt the need to keep it close, like a shield. The drive to River Brew took only 12 minutes, but Clara used every second to steady her nerves. She parked where her car was visible from the cafe's large windows, choosing a table in the bustling main area rather than the quiet corner Richard suggested when he arrived. He returned from the counter with their drinks, a latte for her, black coffee for him, and set them down with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You remembered," Clara said, noting the latte, trying to keep her tone light. "David talked about you constantly," Richard said, settling into his chair. "Your lattes, your love for sunrise hikes, your daughter Lily's art projects. He was devoted to you." The words should have been comforting, but they felt like a probe, testing her defenses. Clara sipped her latte and waited, letting the silence stretch. Richard leaned forward, his expression sympathetic but his eyes sharp. "This must be so hard, Clara, not knowing for 4 years and now this discovery. Have you had time to process it all?" "I'm managing," Clara said carefully, watching his face. "Going through David's things must be emotional," Richard continued, his voice smooth. "All those memories stored away. Did you find much in storage? Sometimes people keep things they never mentioned to their spouses, work documents, for instance. There it was." Clara kept her expression neutral. "Mostly legal journals and client thank-you notes. David saved every letter a client ever wrote him." Richard smiled, but his fingers began a subtle tap against the table. "How like him? No work files?" "He was always so meticulous about documentation. I'd imagine he kept copies of important paperwork." Clara's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Just the usual. Why do you ask?" Richard's smile tightened. "No reason. When the sheriff called this morning, they asked if David had taken any client files home. Confidentiality issues, you know. I assured them David would never do such a thing, but I wanted to be sure, for his reputation's sake." Clara noticed a faint sheen of sweat on Richard's forehead, despite the cafe's cool air. "The sheriff asked about client files?" she said, feigning curiosity. "Standard questions, I'm sure." Richard's fingers tapped faster. "They also asked about his state of mind those final weeks. I told them what I observed, of course." "Did you happen to find any personal writings? Journals? Sometimes people contemplating big life changes write things down." Clara's grip on her latte tightened. David wasn't much for journaling. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "No? How about appointment books?" He always carried that leather planner. His attempt at casual interest was faltering, his voice taking on a sharp edge. Clara made a split-second decision. "Actually, I did find his planner," she said, watching his reaction closely. It was interesting, looking at his final week. All those appointments, wrapping up his practice. Richard's fingers froze mid-tap. "Oh?" he said, his voice too even. "Anything stand out?" Clara paused, her heart pounding. "There was an entry on September 10th that confused me. He'd written, 'Meeting with Thompson, trail parking lot, 7 a.m.' But he told me he was hiking alone that morning." The transformation in Richard's face was instant. The mask of concern shattered, replaced by something cold and calculating. He let out a forced laugh. "Poor David, he was so confused that morning. Actually, he called me around 6:30, sounding agitated. Said retirement was hitting him harder than expected. I tried to talk him out of hiking, suggested we meet to discuss his concerns, but he insisted he needed time alone on the mountain." Clara stared at him, her mind racing. David had never called anyone early in the morning. He was a creature of routine, always up at 5 a.m. for coffee and a run. And his planner entry was clear, deliberate, no sign of confusion. "He called you?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. "Yes," Richard said quickly, leaning forward, "very early. Susan can confirm. The phone woke us both. He sounded unwell. Talking about pressure, things he couldn't handle. I offered to meet him, but he got almost paranoid, said he needed to think." His voice dropped to a confidential tone. Clara, I didn't want to burden you, but David had been showing signs of depression for weeks. The retirement transition was tough on him. Clara's blood ran cold. Depression? David had been vibrant, planning their Hawaii trip, sketching out a sailing route for Lily's son. He'd never hidden his feelings from her in 35 years. David was excited about retirement, she said, her voice sharp. He had plans. Richard's smile was patronizing. Sometimes people hide their true feelings, even from those closest to them. As a lawyer, he'd know how to mask it. That confusion about our meeting, writing it down when it was just a phone call, that's typical of someone under stress. But Clara knew better. David's handwriting in the planner was firm, precise, no trace of a trembling hand. If he'd spoken to Richard that morning, he'd have mentioned it over breakfast. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. I should go. Richard stood too, his coffee cup rattling against its saucer. Clara, wait. If you found anything else, documents, notes that might be misinterpreted, I hope you'll let me know. For David's sake, his reputation. David's reputation doesn't need protecting, Clara said coldly. Excuse me. She walked out, her step steady but her heart racing. In the window's reflection, she saw Richard standing frozen by their table, his coffee cup trembling in his hand. The man who'd delivered David's eulogy, who'd praised his integrity, was lying, and badly. Clara's hands shook as she pushed through the cafe's restroom door. The normalcy of the espresso machine's hiss and customers' chatter surreal against the hammering of her heart. She locked herself in the farthest stall and dialed 911, keeping her voice to a whisper. I'm at River Brew on Main Street. I'm with someone who I believe may be dangerous. Please send someone. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? The dispatcher asked. I don't know. Maybe. His name is Richard Thompson. He's asking questions about my husband, who disappeared 4 years ago, and he's acting erratically. I'm scared. We'll send a unit to check on you. Can you safely stay where you are? I have to go back out there, or he'll get suspicious. Please hurry. Clara ended the call, splashed cold water on her face, and practiced a neutral expression in the mirror. She walked back to the table, her heart pounding. Richard had moved to her side of the booth, blocking her exit, his coffee abandoned across the table. There you are, he said, his smile tight. I was starting to worry. Clara forced herself to slide into the booth, pressed against the wall. Sorry, I'm just feeling overwhelmed by everything today. Understandable, Richard said, his tone hardening. You know, I drove past your house this morning, early around 6 o'clock. Noticed you had boxes out by the curb. Spring cleaning in September? Clara's mouth went dry. There had been no boxes by her curb. Don't lie to me, Clara, Richard cut in, his voice sharp, cutting through the cafe's hum. I saw you loading boxes into your car at the storage unit. Mrs. Lee was quite chatty about your activities. Clara's voice came out higher than intended. I need to leave. My sister's expecting me. Richard didn't budge. What did you find? David kept copies of everything, didn't he? Always so thorough, so self-righteous. His last words were a hiss. Clara pushed against him, her panic rising. Let me go, Richard. For a moment, he didn't move. Then slowly he stood. Of course, let me walk you to your car. It wasn't a request. His hand closed around her elbow, his grip firm as he guided her toward the exit. Clara scanned the cafe, hoping to catch someone's eye, but everyone was absorbed in their own lives. The September air hit her face as they stepped outside, and with it came a new wave of fear. The parking lot was nearly empty, her car parked in the far corner where she'd thought it would be visible from the window. Now that distance felt like a chasm. Where are they? Richard's voice lost all pretense of friendliness, his grip tightening painfully. The documents, the files. Whatever David kept. I know he made copies. I don't know what you're talking about, Clara said, her voice shaking. Richard spun her round, slamming her back against her car. Don't play stupid with me. David was going to ruin everything with his sanctimonious attitude. 30 years of building a practice, helping clients, and he wanted to destroy it all over some numbers on a ledger. "Richard, you're hurting me." That's when she saw the gun. He pulled it from inside his jacket in one smooth motion, pressing it against her ribs, the metal cold through her sweater. "Get in my car. Richard, please. Get in the car." He shoved her toward his black SUV, the gun hidden between their bodies but unmistakable. "Move." Clara's legs felt like water. "You don't have to do this." "Whatever happened with David? Shut up." Richard opened the passenger door, using his body to shield the gun from any passersby. "Get in, or I'll shoot you right here." Clara looked around desperately. A man walked past, engrossed in his phone. The cafe windows reflected the afternoon sun, impossible to see through. No one was coming to help. "Please," she whispered as Richard shoved her into the seat. "I have grandchildren. You should have thought of that before you started digging." He slammed the door and moved to the driver's side, the gun now pointed at her across the center console. "Hands where I can see them." Clara placed her shaking hands on her lap as Richard started the engine and pulled out of the lot. "You should have kept out of this," he said, his voice eerily calm. 4 years, Clara. 4 years of peace, and you had to ruin it." "You killed him," Clara whispered, the realization crystallizing. Richard's eyes stayed on the road. "David killed himself the moment he decided to be a hero. Do you know how many people depended on my practice? Staff, their families, their livelihoods. One self-righteous lawyer was going to ruin dozens of lives." Clara's tears came unbidden as Richard drove faster, leaving downtown Hood River behind. The familiar streets gave way to suburban neighborhoods, then to the rural roads leading toward Mount Hood. "He found discrepancies, didn't he?" she said, her voice trembling. "In the billing." Richard's laugh was bitter. "Discrepancies? Such a polite word." David couldn't understand that sometimes you bend the rules to keep a firm afloat. Clients get their services, insurance pays what they owe, it's a game, and I played it well. But St. David saw everything in black and white. The trees grew denser, the afternoon sun filtering through the canopy. Clara recognized the road. It led to the Ramona Falls trailhead, the same route David would have taken that September morning. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Where do you think?" Richard turned onto a gravel road, the SUV jolting over roots and stones. "Your husband loved his hikes. Thought the mountain gave him clarity. Let's see if it does the same for you." 20 minutes of terrifying silence passed, broken only by Clara's quiet prayers and the crunch of gravel under the tires. Finally, Richard pulled into a small clearing and shut off the engine. "Get out." Clara's legs nearly buckled as she stepped onto the forest floor. The woods were quiet, birds calling faintly in the distance, the peacefulness at odds with the nightmare unfolding. Richard gestured with the gun toward a narrow trail. "Walk. We're going to take a little hike, just like David did." Clara's voice found a surprising steadiness. "They'll find you. The police know I was with you. My sister knows." Richard's smile was cold. "Your sister knows you had coffee with an old friend. The police will find your car at the cafe and assume you went for a walk to clear your head. Grief makes people do strange things." He pushed her forward onto the trail, the gun pressed against her back. The forest floor was uneven, roots and fallen branches catching at Clara's feet. Richard was relentless, his breathing heavy as he urged her forward. "Keep moving," he commanded. "Don't even think about running. You wouldn't make it 10 feet." Clara stumbled, catching herself against a moss-covered tree, the bark rough under her palms. The reality of the moment was suffocating. David had walked these trails, touched these trees, and now she was here, with a gun at her back. They'd gone maybe 100 yards when the first siren wailed in the distance. Richard froze, his head whipping around. "No," he muttered, his voice low. More sirens joined, growing louder, closer. Clara felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by fear as Richard's hand clamped around her arm, yanking her back against him. "You called them," he hissed, his eyes wild. "At the cafe, you called the police." The sirens screamed now, multiple vehicles, their red and blue lights flashing through the trees. "Damn it!" Richard spun her to face the direction they'd come, his arm locking around her neck, the gun pressing against her temple. This wasn't supposed to happen. Car doors slammed, voices shouting commands, the rustle of movement through the underbrush. The police were surrounding the area. "Mr. Thompson." A voice boomed through a megaphone. Sheriff Holtz, Clara recognized. "This is the Clackamas County Sheriff's Department. We have the area surrounded. Let Mrs. Weston go and come out with your hands visible." Richard backed against a towering pine, using its trunk as cover while keeping Clara in front of him. She could feel him trembling, his arm tightening around her throat. "Back off," he shouted. "Everyone back off, or I'll kill her. I swear I'll do it." "Mr. Thompson, no one needs to get hurt." Sheriff Holt's voice carried clearly. "Let's talk. Let Clara go, and we can work something out." "There's nothing to work out," Richard's voice cracked. "David was going to destroy everything I built." Clara could see officers taking positions behind trees, weapons drawn but pointed down, careful and professional. A younger officer in tactical gear moved closer, using the undergrowth for cover. "Stay back." Richard swung the gun toward the movement, then back to Clara's head. "I mean it." The standoff stretched on, minutes feeling like hours. Sweat dripped from Richard's face onto Clara's neck, his body shaking against her back, the gun wavering against her temple. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he kept muttering. "David should have taken the money I offered him. Enough to retire in style, travel the world. But no, he had to be noble. Money?" Clara whispered, her voice hoarse from the pressure on her throat. Richard's grip shifted, his agitation growing. "He had evidence," he said, almost rambling. "Copies of everything, ledgers, client files, bank records. So damn thorough, just like always. Said he was going to the FBI that afternoon if I didn't turn myself in." "Mr. Thompson," a new voice called out, calm and steady. "I'm Officer Mark Chun, a negotiator. Can we talk? Help me understand what happened." Richard laughed, a bitter sound. "What happened?" One sanctimonious lawyer decided he was judge and jury. 20 years of friendship meant nothing to him. Clara felt Richard's arm loosen slightly, his movements erratic. The gun moved from her temple, waving toward the police, then back again. Officer Chun took a slow step forward, hands empty and visible. "Let's talk, Richard. I'm sure there's—" "Don't come closer." Richard's voice rose to a scream, panic overtaking him. Clara could feel his heart pounding against her back, his breathing ragged. Chun took another step. It was too much. Richard made a choked sound, half sob, half snarl, and raised the gun, bringing it down hard against Clara's head. Pain exploded through her skull, white lights flashing across her vision. She cried out, her knees buckling, and she collapsed to the forest floor. As Clara fell, Richard's human shield was gone. He stared at her crumpled form, then at the officers closing in, and made a desperate choice. He turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth deeper into the forest. He made it barely 30 feet before 2 officers in tactical gear tackled him, pinning him face down in the pine needles. "Stop resisting." One shouted as they cuffed him. Richard thrashed, ranting, "You don't understand. David destroyed everything, my firm, my reputation, my life." Clara clutched her bleeding head, the world spinning as EMTs rushed to her side. Through her pain, she heard Richard's voice, wild and desperate, as they hauled him to his feet. He wouldn't listen. I begged him, offered him anything, but he had to be the hero. The EMTs were gentle, checking her pupils, pressing gauze to the gash on her scalp. "You're going to be okay," one assured her. "Just a nasty cut. We'll get you to the hospital." Clara's tears mixed with the blood on her face, but through the haze, she felt a grim satisfaction. Richard had failed. Whatever he'd done to David, whatever secrets he was hiding, they were unraveling. Sheriff Holt knelt beside her as the EMTs worked. "You did good, Mrs. Weston. That 911 call saved your life." Clara nodded weakly, wincing at the pain. The forest buzzed with activity, officers' radios crackling, evidence being marked, the trail now a crime scene. Richard was dragged away, still shouting about David's righteousness, his suit smeared with dirt and pine needles. Clara's thoughts drifted to Lily, their daughter in Seattle. She hadn't told Lily about the backpack yet, hadn't wanted to reopen old wounds. But now, with Richard's confession, the truth was closer than ever. As the EMTs helped her to a stretcher, Clara's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with trembling hands, expecting Ellen's check-in. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. "Mom, I know what happened to Dad. I'm coming home. Don't trust anyone." The message was signed Lily. Clara's head throbbed under the butterfly bandage as she sat in the police station's interview room, the fluorescent lights intensifying her headache. The EMTs had insisted on a hospital visit, but she refused until she'd given her statement. She needed answers about David, and she needed them now. Sheriff Daniel Holt sat across from her, a digital recorder between them, while a younger officer, Mark Chun, took notes. Clara's phone lay on the table, Lily's text burning in her mind. "Mom, I know what happened to Dad. I'm coming home. Don't trust anyone." The message had shaken her, but with Richard Thompson in custody, she felt a fragile hope. Lily was coming home. Her daughter, who'd moved to Seattle after David's disappearance, hadn't been in touch for months, her grief creating a distance Clara couldn't bridge. But now Lily knew something that could explain why David had died. "Take your time, Mrs. Weston," Sheriff Holt said, his voice gentle but firm. "Start wherever you're comfortable." Clara recounted the day's events, the backpack in the beaver dam, Emily's revelations about Richard's odd behavior, the day planner's evidence of a secret meeting, Richard's escalating panic at the cafe, and the terrifying standoff in the forest. Her voice trembled as she described the gun against her temple, Richard's rants about David's righteousness, and the money he'd offered. "He kept saying David was going to destroy everything," she finished, her hands clenching in her lap. "He mentioned evidence, ledgers, files, bank records." Holt nodded, his expression grim. "Mrs. Weston, Thompson's story is falling apart fast. Faced with the day planner and your statement, he's talking." Clara's breath caught. "Talking about what?" Holt hesitated, then opened a folder. "He's confessed to David's murder." The word hit like a sledgehammer. Murder, not an accident, not suicide murder. Clara's vision blurred with tears, but she forced herself to listen as Holt continued. According to Thompson, he and two accomplices men who worked maintenance at his firm, handling what he called off-the-books jobs, met David at the trailhead that morning. They told David they wanted to discuss a resolution to their misunderstanding, said they could work things out privately. David went along, wary but willing to talk. They followed him up the trail for about an hour, getting him far from any witnesses. Clara closed her eyes, picturing David hiking with those men, his trust in Richard, his hope for a peaceful solution. He'd always believed in people's better nature. They stopped at a remote overlook, Holt said, his voice softening. Thompson made one last attempt to buy David's silence. When David refused and said he was going to the FBI that afternoon, Thompson claims one of his accomplices pushed him. But given Thompson's lies, we suspect he gave the order, or did it himself. It was a 150-foot drop onto rocks. Death would have been instantaneous. Clara's chest tightened, tears spilling over. "He wouldn't have suffered?" she whispered. Holt shook his head. "No, Mrs. Weston, it was quick." She nodded, wiping her eyes, the image of David's final moments searing into her mind. Why? What was worth killing for? Holt pulled out a document, his expression darkening. Thompson admitted to years of fraud at the firm, billing clients for services never rendered, inflating hours, even charging for cases tied to clients who died. He altered electronic records to cover it up. David found discrepancies in his final week's financial records that didn't match, suspicious bank deposits. He started investigating quietly, gathering evidence. Clara's mind flashed to the receipts from Nelson and Associates, the employment law firm. "The attorney," she said. David was consulting about whistleblower protections. He was building a case. Holt nodded. Thompson found out, won't say how, and tried to buy him off. When that failed, he resorted to threats. David didn't back down. A knock on the door interrupted them. A female officer leaned in, whispering to Holt. His eyebrows rose, and he excused himself, leaving Clara with Officer Chun. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Lily. "At the station. Where are you?" Clara's heart leaped. "My daughter's here," she told Chun, who nodded and stepped out to check. Moments later, the door opened, and Lily rushed in, her dark hair disheveled, her eyes red from crying. She was 32, but in that moment, she looked like the teenager who'd clung to Clara after David's disappearance. "Mom," Lily said, throwing her arms around her. Clara held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Lily, you're here. Your text, what do you know about Dad?" Lily pulled back, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "I didn't want to tell you until I was sure. I've been digging, Mom. Dad sent me something before he disappeared. A package. I didn't understand it at the time, but it was evidence. Files, bank records, emails. He told me to keep it safe, not to tell anyone, not even you. He said it was to protect us." Clara's mind reeled. "Why didn't you tell me?" Lily's voice broke. "I was scared. Dad said if anything happened to him, I should wait until I had proof. I've been working with a friend in Seattle, a data analyst. We traced the records. Thompson was running a money laundering scheme through the firm, funneling cash for some shady clients. Dad found out, and he was going to blow the whistle." Clara's hands shook as she processed this. David had protected them, even at the cost of his life. Why now, Lily? Why come forward today? Lily's eyes filled with tears. "I saw the news about the backpack this morning. I knew it was time. I contacted the FBI on my way here. They're already working with the sheriff. Thompson's done, Mom. Dad's evidence is enough to take him down." Holt returned, his face a mix of satisfaction and solemnity. "Mrs. Weston, Lily, we've got an update. Thompson's confession is expanding. He's naming names, trying to cut a deal. The two accomplices, Jake Ellis and Carl Moore, maintenance workers at his firm, are being picked up now. The FBI's involved, given the interstate nature of the laundering. Your husband uncovered something big, Mrs. Weston. It goes beyond one corrupt lawyer." Clara nodded, holding Lily's hand tightly. "What about David? His remains?" Holt's expression softened. "Based on Thompson's confession about the exact location, we sent a helicopter to the cliff area. They found remains lodged in a ravine, between rocks. After 4 years, identification will require DNA testing, and much is missing. But we'll bring him home." Clara's tears fell freely. "I can bury him? Give him a proper funeral?" "Yes," Holt said gently. "You can." Lily squeezed her hand, her own tears falling. "Dad was a hero, Mom. He knew the risk, but he did it anyway." Clara thought of David's final week, the shaking hands Emily had noticed, the secret attorney visits, the way he'd carried alone. He'd known Thompson was dangerous, but felt compelled to stop him. "He was protecting us," Clara whispered. "That's why he didn't tell me about the meeting." Holt nodded. "Your husband was a brave man. He could have taken the money, looked the other way. Instead, he chose to do what was right." Clara's mind drifted to the 2 men she'd lost that day, David, who died 4 years ago trying to stop a criminal, and Richard, the friend she thought she'd known. Richard had shared their table, laughed at David's jokes, played the role of trusted partner while laundering money through his firm. But David had seen through the facade, gathering evidence, consulting lawyers, preparing to bring Richard down legally. He died on the mountain he loved, pushed by men he'd trusted, but he died with his integrity intact. As Clara signed her statement, the sun was setting outside, painting Mount Hood in hues of gold and purple. Lily stood beside her, her presence a balm to Clara's aching heart. They left the station together, stepping into the cool evening air. Recovery teams were bringing David's remains home, and Clara was already planning his funeral, a proper burial with full honors where his courage would be known. Richard would face justice, his accomplices would be caught, the laundering network dismantled. David's final battle was won. Clara and Lily drove home slowly, the road winding through the forest. Clara glanced at her daughter, whose face mirrored David's determination. "You kept his evidence safe all this time," Clara said softly. "You're as brave as he was." Lily's eyes glistened. "I just wish I'd acted sooner. But Dad made me promise to wait until it was safe." Clara reached for her hand. "You did what he asked. And now we have the truth." They pulled into the driveway, the house dark but no longer empty. Together, they would bury David, honor his legacy, and heal. The not knowing was over, and justice, delayed by 4 years, had finally arrived.
Thank you for watching our channel Modern Stories. If you liked our video, you should subscribe for more amazing videos like this. Have a healthy and happy day. See you in the next one.